So I'm Norma Skydam. I'm the president of the Community Foundation of South Puget Sound, and I just have a very short little job, and that's to say welcome to each of you. Lisa Smith, the Director of Enterprise for Equity, will be introducing our speaker to you in a minute. You know, when opportunities come into our midst, we have two choices. We can say, yes, let's take a try, or let's step back and not move into what's presenting itself. And I didn't know Ted Howard, though I've heard Lisa say his name. But when she said he was going to be in town, it just was like, yes, let's make sure that we can have this opportunity brought into the community and to share with as many people as possible. So on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Community Foundation, on behalf of the other sponsors of this evening's event, Enterprise for Equity, the Thurston Asset Building Coalition, Thurston EDC, and the Northwest Cooperative Center, we are so glad that you are here to share the knowledge that we will all be gaining collectively as we listen to Ted. So at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Lisa, and we'll get on with the show.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right? Wonderful. As Norma mentioned, my name is Lisa Smith, and I'm fortunate to work with an organization called Enterprise for Equity. And we help people with limited income start small businesses. We also offer microloans, little loans up to $25,000. And we've been working hard on little businesses here, little businesses there, growing them. But when I met Ted Howard 5 years ago, I'd heard of him before, but when I met him and saw how broad and how deep his understanding and experience was of really building system change, I became a devoted follower. So I'm very honored that he's here tonight. I want to also just recognize Commissioner Bud Blake, who's here. Woohoo! He's our new commissioner, and we're really grateful that you're here. You've added a lot to the commission, and so thank you for that. I also wanted to say thank you to Dr. Stokes, who is the president of SPSCC, for hosting us. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. You'll have to get back somehow. I also wanted to just say we, Enterprise for Equity, you know, we build businesses, we support businesses, but the work I get to do with Michael Cade of the Economic Development Council is pretty rich. And so I wanted to do a shout out to Michael Cade. We're working on beautiful things in rural communities in our county, and it's awfully fun. So you may hear things about traditional economic development, but there's some good stuff going on here that's innovative. So without further ado. So Ted Howard is the co-founder and executive director of the Democracy Cooperative. Previously, he served as the executive director of the National Center for Economic Alternatives, and in 2010, he was appointed as the Stephen Minter Senior Fellow for Social Justice at the Cleveland Foundation. He's going to go into a little bit more detail about his background, but I wanted to say that he lectures a lot. He goes a lot around the country giving good information, and frequently he speaks about community wealth building at major national conferences, including the Clinton Global Initiative, America, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, Cooperatives United World Conference in Manchester, the Environmental Protection Agency, Equitable Development Workshop. The man gets around. And I don't know if you have heard of his book or have read his book, but he wrote this chapter on owning your own job is a beautiful thing. And one of the things I've learned from him, and he'll share more about this, that you know, if we're going to help people with low incomes who've been out of work for a long time, helping them get a job is just not enough. A job is not enough. You got to create ways for them to build wealth. And we're going to learn some very cool things tonight. So I'd like to just have you all welcome Ted Howard.
Good evening, everyone. I've titled my talk tonight, which I've never done before, so being here has inspired me, I often talk about community wealth building and changing communities, but I've titled my talk tonight, You and Community Wealth Building. And what we're going to do is talk about all kinds of exciting things happening all over the country. I don't know enough yet about Olympia to have been able to put a slide into this presentation, but I invite you tonight to, as you're hearing what's going on around the country, and some of it will be new, some you will have known, but the person in your chair, be able to ask yourself, or be able to think, gosh, isn't this great what they're doing in Albuquerque or in Florida or wherever, but what might that look like if we were to do something like that here? You know, what are the possibilities for a local Olympia expression of community wealth building? In fact, all over this country, and I'm very fortunate, I spend over half my days on the road traveling, working with communities all over the United States. There is a movement around community transformation that is taking place in this country right now, and much needed, and let us be sure about that. You don't hear about it a lot. You know, if you turn on, for those of us that are old enough, we still watch the nightly news on the big channels, but if you read, you don't really hear much about this community transformation that's taking place. And I hope tonight to persuade you that there is a movement building, that it's a movement that can have an enormous impact on all of our lives, on the communities where we are, ultimately I think in the direction of this country, because in my view, things have gone pretty radically off the tracks in the United States right now, and I'll be talking about that. I wanted to just set this up also with three very brief quotations. So I was talking to Teresa before this, and she said, kind of out of the blue, this is such an exciting time in which we can make a big difference. And I really think that's true. It's clear there are a lot of challenges and problems, but it's a very exciting time right now. And as I was sort of standing over there reflecting, for some reason, I thought of one of those Hobbit movies. And, you know, Cate Blanchett plays like the fairy queen or something. And she says to some little hobbit, even the littlest person can change the world. And I really think that's true. Not that we're little, but any of us can make that sort of difference. And then I was standing over there looking at the posters the university, the community college has. And there's this beautiful quote, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Eleanor Roosevelt. So with that, I'd like to begin. So we're talking about you tonight, the person in your seat, the one who shares your DNA structure right there. And we're talking about building community wealth. So first, and let me say I'm going to show some slides. I'm going to show a 3.5-minute video tape. I'm going to go back to some final slides, and then we'll do questions and answers. So first, what do we mean by community wealth building? It's a strategy for a different kind of economic development than is often practiced in many cities. I'm not saying there's not good economic development taking place, but in general, community wealth building is something that's just emerging as a kind of new paradigm or a new direction for developing our communities. First, it's very place-based. It's concerned about place, and I'm going to talk about place a lot tonight. And some of the places it's deeply concerned about are very low income and disinvested areas that have been left behind for a long time. And community wealth building really argues if you want to change the dynamic in a low income area. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm going to be talking about that a bit. I live in a neighborhood with perhaps, well, there are 6 neighborhoods together. They share the same general demographic. 50,000 people live in those neighborhoods. 40% of them live below the poverty line. The median household income for a family of 4 in these neighborhoods is below $18,500. And the federal poverty line for a family of four is $22,500 roughly. So these are really hurting. And community wealth building says if you want to really tackle that problem, you need to focus on that problem. Don't be confused that if you simply build the regional economy, that if you simply have things grow in general, that it's going to trickle down into those neighborhoods, because it doesn't. And we see that over and over and over again. And this is not just a problem for Cleveland. There are now, according to the Census Department, about 46 million of us who live below the poverty line in the United States in the richest, most successful economy the world's ever known. And the United States computes poverty statistics very differently than any other advanced country. This all came out of the 60s in the Commerce Department, Labor Department. They put together this formula. But if we did it like Canada or Japan or Germany or England or any of the other advanced countries do it, in the United States, we would have not 46 million people, we'd have closer to 70 million people living below the poverty line. Even the Federal Reserve Bank and Standard & Poor's and the Business Roundtable, wild-eyed radical groups like that have said this is dragging down our economy. We can't continue to go forward if we have so many people that are being left out. Community wealth building emphasizes local ownership of business and assets and local control. It also emphasizes broadening ownership over business assets. It really says, if it's a good thing that individual entrepreneurs have businesses, we ought to find a way for more and more people to own a stake in the place they work in cooperatives, in employee-owned firms, in social enterprises, and so forth, so that as these firms are successful, people can share in the profits that their labor contributed. It's very much about keeping wealth local. I work with some Native American organizations, very fortunate to do this on the Pine Ridge Reservation in the Dakotas. And there's a calculation done on Pine Ridge that every time a dollar hits the reservation, hits the res, it exits the reservation within 48 hours. So, and why is that? Well, the money comes in from a welfare payment or something, and then there are no businesses on the reservation, so everybody piles in their car and drives an hour and a half up to Rapid City and shops at Walmart. So you don't get any multiplier effect on the reservation itself, so the money doesn't move around. As they say in my neighborhood in Cleveland, the float doesn't get around. It's very much about leveraging local assets. So many of our communities, we keep thinking there's something out there that if we could just become the next Silicon Valley, or if we could just, get into giant, wind turbines, I think we should, but that industry or biotech, not everybody can do that. And what we neglect is the assets we have right now and how to leverage those assets so that they can most benefit the place we live in. And by assets, I mean things like universities and hospitals, these large anchor institutions that are in our community, and I'll talk more about that. And then finally, community wealth building focuses on not the number of jobs that are being created, but the quality of the jobs that are being created and how they contribute to the building up of assets and wealth for the people who are employed. In other words, if we all had a strategy that what we want to do is just create the maximum number of jobs in our community, the answer for that might be, let's use our tax revenues and our subsidies to entice, Walmart to come into the community and bring hundreds and hundreds of jobs. But the problem is people, for those kind of jobs with that sort of business, often can't get ahead. So the issue is, how do we organize labor and jobs that really have a wealth building component to it? So those are some of the characteristics of community wealth building, and I'm going to show you what I mean, and I'm going to show you innovations and models taking place around the country. First, this issue of place matters. I really want to hammer that home. This is the place I live in. I live in Cleveland, Ohio now, and you see there to the left, it says 64 in a circle. That is the average life expectancy of a male who lives in the neighborhood of Huff in Cleveland. It is virtually 100% African American community. Right above it, you may be able to see Glenville. That's the neighborhood I live in, so they're very similar. 64 years for an African American male in life expectancy in Huff. If you go 8 miles due east to the suburb of Lyndhurst, which is almost 100% white, the average life expectancy for a male is 88 years. Within 8 miles, there's a 24-year life expectancy difference. And those of you that, some of you may work in healthcare, and you know the thinking widely shared in the healthcare profession now is that what constitutes our health and you know, how healthy we are, only about 20% of it is related to access to care or the quality of the health care we get. The other 80% are what are called the social determinants of health. And by that we mean your income level, poverty levels, safety of the neighborhoods, the education, all these things add up to impact your health. And something is clearly going on in these neighborhoods related to the social determinants of health. And you can almost directly correlate what's going on to the level of income, household income, and the level of wealth of the families in these neighborhoods. So place matters, and not just as a strategy or a tactic, it matters as literally a life and death matter. And that's what we're confronting in this situation in our country now. One of the great assets, I mentioned leveraging anchor institutions. So right now I'm going to talk about anchor institutions for a couple minutes. Then I'm going to look at some wealth building models and strategies and innovations, both in terms of cities and in terms of individual organizations. And then I'm going to kind of close out to talk about the role of philanthropy in all of this. So why are anchor institutions important? Well, first of all, economists call anchors sticky capital. So they're like universities, they're like this place. And we can be pretty sure that while businesses will come and go all over Olympia in the next 50 years or 100 years, it's very much more than likely that this community college is still going to be here. Now it may expand, it'll probably be bigger, but this is going to be here. St. Martin's is going to be there. The major hospital is going to be here. In Cleveland, the Cleveland Clinic will be there for 100 years. I can absolutely guarantee that. So they're locked in place. That's why they're called anchor institutions. They have so much sunk cost they can't get up and leave. So they're very important because they're assets in our community that are trapped in place, but are not necessarily leveraged for local benefit in maximum way. They're economic engines. In most of our larger cities in America, and it's perhaps the situation here, usually 5 of the top 10 employers in a city are what are called eds and meds, universities and hospitals. They have a vested interest in the surrounding community, or they should, because they can't get up and leave. So the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, he's an internationally famous surgeon named Toby Cosgrove. Dr. Cosgrove says, you know, Cleveland is in our name. We're the Cleveland Clinic. You know, if all the people all over the country are afraid to come to Cleveland because of the situation in the neighborhoods, you know, they're going to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And by the way, I didn't show it on this slide, but where that 64 is, just to the right, you see a little bit of blue? That's the campus of University Hospitals, one of the most important hospitals in the city. And right next to it, you see a little cross down below. That's the Cleveland Clinic. 2 of the major hospital systems of this country are right across the street from the situation where life expectancy is 24 years less than out in the suburbs. So astonishing. And anchors are typically nonprofits or they're public institutions, so they tend to have a sort of social mission that can be appealed to. What's the economic opportunity here? If you take all the eds and meds all over the country, look at the second line there. Their annual economic activity, their expenditures, are over $1 trillion a year, year in, year out, in institutions locked in our communities. That's over 6% of the gross domestic product of the nation. What's the opportunity to start to capture more of that to help rebuild our communities? And the final line there is investment endowments. These institutions have a lot of money, they invest. This was figures a couple of years ago. It's over $750 billion. The market's been up for some time here. It's probably over $1 trillion now. It could well be approaching that. And virtually none of that money, because I work with universities and hospitals all over the country, almost none of that money is invested with an eye to, is there a way to do our investments that are going to be best for the place that we're located in? Will create more jobs, build more wealth, create a safer, more stable community. So these conversations are just starting all over the country, but you can see the potential, I hope, is enormous. The way anchors impact our communities, procurement and supply chain, buy a lot of stuff. Cleveland Clinic buys something like $1.6 billion of goods and services. How much of that could be driven locally? Their hiring and employment policies. Cleveland Clinic, a huge system, over 30,000 employees. Their training advancement, I said investment, real estate development, construction, technical assistance, some of them doing business incubation. We tend to think of anchors not as businesses. We think of them in terms of, here at the university, you're doing research and you're teaching, you may do some service. Hospitals are delivering healthcare. But in fact, they are large economic engines, and that's what's important for community development, community wealth building. Local procurement is a very big issue and one I work on a lot, and I won't belabor this chart, but suffice it to say that local procurement, buying locally, institutionally, is good for the purchaser, for the anchor institution, in terms of vendor relationships, in terms of bringing their supply chain closer to them and so forth. And it's very good for the community, obviously, because it creates employment and it creates expanded business opportunities for local and existing businesses. I know we're at a community college, so I wanted to cite one community college and how they're starting to conduct themselves. Miami-Dade College is the largest community college in the country. It has about 50,000 students that are going to school there. They established in 1994 an Office of Minority and Small Business Enterprise, and because of the work they do, they have a very interesting concept they call reverse trade show, which is the procurement officers of the campus all get together with booths about the kinds of things they buy, and then they invite vendors and suppliers who sell that kind of stuff to come in to meet them so they could see how they can get in the supply chain. And as a result of that, they have gotten up to as high as 27% of their expenditures are now for these what are called MBEs, minority business enterprises, that are all based locally. So again, they intentionally moved in a way to drive money into the local community and create opportunity for local businesses. University hospitals, I know a lot about this one because I did a case study on this strategy with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So, university hospitals had a large construction effort underway where they were going to spend $1.2 billion on a 5-year construction effort. $1.2 billion in Northeast Ohio is a lot of money. And the normal way they would do this is they would go to a major national construction firm, Forest City is one, Turner, you've heard of these companies, and they would basically say, look, we've got $1.2 billion to spend. Here's the land we've accumulated where we want the buildings built. Here are the designs and so forth. We'd like you to bring it in on this budget and on timeline. And if you could throw a couple contracts off to some local minority and local firms or women-owned firms, that would be great. But we're not going to hold you to it. That's your decision. We want the stuff built. But university hospitals said, we're not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to see what kind of local impact we could have on our economy if we had a new strategy. And so those circles are the strategy. What they said is that 80% of the $1.2 billion would be spent regionally for local firms. So they said 80% of the $1.2 billion will go to local companies owned and based in Northeast Ohio. And they achieved 93% of $1.2 billion. And the way they know they achieved it is they hired a completely independent firm called Minority Business Services to audit and monitor this whole thing. They said, we don't want this to be a scam. This isn't about PR. We want it to make a difference. They also exceeded their other targets. In the end, 110 local minority and women-owned companies that had never been able to get a contract with a healthcare system got into the supply chain. That's just enormous. And then what University Hospitals said is, we're not going to be satisfied with that. That was a peak moment. They got huge, great press. The mayor loved them. Everything was cool. They said, we're not going to be satisfied with that, because if we keep losing population and if poverty keeps growing in Northeast Ohio, we're going to be out of business. Not only is it sort of morally the right thing to do to start to address this, but who are our customers going to be? So now what they're doing is systematically working through their supply chain to impose the same requirements of 80% and the same minority carve-outs and so forth and local businesses on their daily year in, year out operations. And while they spent $1.2 billion on construction in a 5-year period, their annual purchasing every year is over $900 million. So this is a huge opportunity for the community of Cleveland. Remember I said one of the characteristics of community wealth building was the recirculation of money, stopping the leakage of dollars out of the community. So that's what's going on there. And then the mayor of Cleveland, Frank Jackson, took what University Hospitals did and invited in the owners of other hospitals, big institutions, the convention center, we have a casino, for-profit companies, and said, ladies and gentlemen, I know there's been some talk that we can't really find local vendors here to do the work that we need done, but these fellows at University Hospitals seem to have achieved it. So I'd like you all to sign on voluntarily to a community benefits agreement that commits you as you expand to the same targets, and they did. That starts to change the system in Cleveland. That starts to become the new normal for what's acceptable business practice by these large institutions. 2 quotes. Tom Zenti is the CEO of the hospital system that did that, Vision 2010. As he said, community and healthcare leaders are discovering that hospitals can help heal entire cities through economic development. Healthcare systems can create jobs and wealth, and we can earn the trust and goodwill of our neighbors. This is not how healthcare leaders, CEOs were talking 10, 15, 20 years ago. They were delivering healthcare. Now they understand we can conduct our business in a way that people are going to be healthier and not even need some of our services. And here's one from the president of Northern Kentucky University, who's also a leader in this anchor institution movement. The university cannot thrive without the full support of its community, and the community cannot thrive without the full engagement of its university. The future of each is tied to the other. This is the foundation on which partnership is built. And I can tell you this was not the prevailing philosophy not too long ago. If you go to universities all over, especially in the East Coast and Midwest, you walk onto a campus, everything faces inside. The doors are not open to the community. They're very different kind of ethos that's existing now as anchor institutions understand how their fate is inextricably bound up. And we call this at the Collaborative, and this is the last slide on anchors, but again, I just want you to get the potential of this as an asset to start to make our communities better. We call this the anchor mission. In other words, it's not enough for a university to have a little office over here with 3 people in it and do things with the community. That doesn't change the dynamic. The issue is what we call the anchor mission, which is consciously and strategically using their place-based economic power along with their human and their intellectual capital, all the aspects of the institution, and harmonizing it and directing it for the welfare of the community in which they are anchored and rooted. Now, universities and hospitals are not social service agencies. They are not philanthropies. I'm talking about there's a business case for doing this. Now, they also have foundations, and they can be very generous. I'm talking a straight business proposition. It is better for your institution to start to conduct itself in this way, and we have a lot of examples of it, and it's going to be much better for the community. So now I'd like to talk about some models. So those are anchors. They're an asset that can be deployed. Now I'd like to talk about community wealth building initiatives and models that some of which I've worked with around the country, some of which are gearing up. But remember I said in my view, there's a movement growing around this. The anchor institutions are part of that movement. Now we're going to look at some of really on the ground nuts and bolts of what this movement's like. And all those good people you see up there are working for companies that you're about to meet. So first, if I had shown this map 6 years ago, and I wanted to make a map of wealth building initiatives across the nation, where communities are intentionally generating wealth building strategies, mayors and the like, there would be exactly 0 dots on that map. This is all activity that's occurred over the last 6 or 7 years, and this map is a little bit old, there's even more. So for instance, in New Orleans, where the Democracy Collaborative has been doing work, Mayor Landrieu got reelected for office. And he started something called the Economic Opportunity Initiative. And that initiative is designed to address a core problem that's dragging New Orleans down, which is that in Orleans Parish, where New Orleans is located, 52% of African American males in Orleans Parish are outside the formal labor market. That is, they don't get a paycheck. Now, some of them may be street musicians or whatever, but in effect, 52% of African American males are unemployed in the city. And the mayor said, we can't go forward like that. So he started an economic opportunity initiative that we were fortunate enough to participate in and are still working in. And it has 5 strategies, one of which is to leverage the place-based purchasing and investment power of the anchor institutions, particularly the hospitals, to create new employment. And the other is the city is going to back the creation of cooperative businesses specifically designed to work with the anchor institutions and provide employment to the 52%. That's a very different strategy than many cities have had. Chicago has established something called CASE, Chicago Anchors for a Strong Economy. They've been convened by the mayor, and the anchors are starting to work together and look for opportunities to impact, again, like south side of Chicago, where the University of Chicago is. University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious and expensive to go to schools in the United States. Right across the street is South Side, which is a very disinvested, low-income African-American neighborhood. In Baltimore, the mayor has convened what she calls the Baltimore City Anchor Plan, and gotten the anchor institutions like Johns Hopkins to sign on to a strategy to conduct their business in a new way. I don't have time to say all the specifics of this, but we could in Q&A. In Richmond, Virginia, the mayor has established the nation's first Office of Community Wealth Building, designed specifically to do this. I work in Amarillo, Texas, so just in case you think, well, this is all like liberal cities or black urban mayors, not in Amarillo, Texas. Let me tell you. Amarillo has started the Panhandle Wealth Building Initiative, which the Community Foundation, the Amarillo Area Foundation, has catalyzed, which is doing a whole broad range of community wealth building strategies, not only in Amarillo, but the whole Panhandle. And I've heard repeatedly since I've been here that for whatever challenges Olympia has, some of the rural communities in the other counties are really hurting. Same thing is true in the Panhandle. You've got little towns that are fighting for survival. Will they be there? So this wealth building initiative is designed to impact the entire Panhandle. In Cleveland, we have the Greater University Circle Initiative, and tomorrow I'm going down to San Francisco Bay, where we've worked with Kaiser Permanente and the California Endowment. Do you like KP? Yeah, okay. So Kaiser Permanente is a nonprofit. Lots of you work with nonprofit organizations or head them up. And, but they're not like our kind of nonprofit because their revenues are $55 billion a year. And they have 200,000 employees. But as I said earlier today, we do share in common at least one thing with Kaiser Permanente. Our nonprofits and their nonprofit don't pay taxes. So, but Kaiser Permanente is really on the forefront of how do they use their economic power to benefit communities. So we've established something called Anchors for Resilient Communities, and the idea is how to drive their supply chain into Oakland, East Oakland, and Richmond, which are two of the remaining lower income areas of the Bay Area. This, you'll be happy to know I'm not going to talk in great detail, but what I want to say is community wealth building, to be effective, needs to build structures. It's not like a project where you go out for 3 years. It's building structures. Just like somebody built this university, we need to build new kinds of structures in our communities. And this is a different sorts of ways to structure the accumulation of assets and wealth. For instance, you'll see on the second column, third column to the right, sorry. You see second line down, ESOPs and worker cooperatives. So you may have heard of employee stock ownership plans. Some of them are not very interesting, but increasingly, a number of them are becoming very democratic. There are now over 10,000 employee-owned companies in the United States, owned in whole or part, over 10,000, employing over 10.5 million people. That's more people than are now in private sector unions in the United States. That's how radically things have changed. So you know, I'm old enough to remember back in the 60s and 70s, if you went around saying things like, you know, I've got an idea, I think that working people should own the place they work in. That was like, what are you, a crazy socialist? Well, almost 11 million people are operating in this way. And the academic literature, these have been studied like crazy. Joe Blasi is a professor at Rutgers who's one of the best academician scholars looking at this. What the literature shows is if you take, you know, an ESOP company making widgets and a normal company or traditional company making widgets, the ESOP company over and over again will be more productive. So it's not the case if employees own the place, it's less productive. They'll be more productive. The accumulation of assets and wealth for each worker because of their equity stake in a company is 2 or 3 times what it is in a traditional company with a 401k. There's greater employee satisfaction because people are owners and they're participating. So, you know, this is a real life model. There are credit unions everywhere. You've got them here. There are 4,000 to 5,000 community development corporations in the country. I'm going to give you a couple examples of very interesting things they're doing. And all the way to the right, there are vast publicly owned assets. We tend to think that everything is just in private hands in the United States. At the very bottom, above our logo, you see trustee ownership. So what is that? There's something in Alaska called the Alaska Permanent Fund, may have heard about. A Republican governor in the 1960s established the Alaska Permanent Fund. Alaska was just being open to oil drilling. So clearly all this oil was going to be extracted from the ground. So now I'm setting aside the whole question of, well, is that really good for the environment and all that? And so we're not having that conversation. Just the wealth is being extracted from the ground. And what the governor said is, you know, this isn't just, you know, oil under the ground that can be taken out. It's actually sort of the patrimony of the residents of our state. It's our oil. And so there are contracts set up so that when the oil is extracted from the ground, the companies need to pay into the Alaska Permanent Fund. What that means is that every year, every single year for decades, on one day, everybody in the state gets a check that's their share of what was extracted from the ground. It doesn't matter if you're 1 month old or if you're 100 years old, everybody gets the same check, same size. It changes over years depending on the amount of economic activity. For a family of 4 in some years, the checks they got totaled $10,000 from the state government. And there was a move a couple years ago to unwind this whole thing and get rid of the Alaska Permanent Fund. And the person who fought the hardest to keep it was Sarah Palin. So one thing about community wealth strategies is they tend to also go across the ideological lines that have so, bound our country up. If you look at, the United States Senate, one of the strongest proponents of employee stock ownership, ESOPs, is Bernie Sanders, who's a senator from Vermont. And he is literally, and I'm not sort of casting aspersions, he is literally a card-carrying socialist. He's the only one in the Senate. And he's proud, Bernie Sanders, and he somehow gets elected in Vermont. A couple years ago, he sponsored legislation to expand employee ownership, and the senator who signed on to the bill as his co-sponsor was then Senator Rick Santorum, one of the most conservative Republican senators in the U.S. Senate. But for both of them, the idea of giving people a piece of the action, they may have different motivations, but they both saw that this was something that was the right thing to do. And that's what's interesting, I think, in some of these dynamics. So I won't talk more about this, but it's fascinating stuff. It really is. We've got books coming out on it and such. So now I'm going to give you some quick models. I'll go through it quickly to just show you how it works. So this is a company. It's a cooperative down in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's called Prospera. It used to be called Wages. It is in the home cleaning industry, as it says. About 100, now it's up to actually about 120 members. They're all women. They're from Central America. They're immigrant women who have had very hard time finding employment. They used to work, many of them used to work for big companies that, you call and say, will you send somebody over to clean my house? And, when you do that, at least, where I live, you could be paying like $20 an hour to have, a couple women come in and do this work. But the women who do the work get minimum wage. They're getting like $7.25 or $7.50, but you're paying $20. And they tend to be using chemicals. They're very, if you're doing it every day, these are toxic chemicals, and they're not all that good for you as the homeowner. So the women got together in 1995 and formed what was then called Wages, now Prospera. They're just starting their 6th co-op. I believe they're up to 120 members. Their wages now are $15 an hour. They get health benefits, and their branding and their niches, they're doing environmentally friendly cleaning. So this is something that is building wealth in the community of the Bay Area where these women work. This is Greyston Bakery. It's a social enterprise. It's not a co-op. It's in Yonkers, New York. It's been around 35 years. It makes incredible cookies and brownies. You can buy them now. Their stuff's in Whole Foods. About 50% of the 85 people who work in the company at any one time are ex-offenders, many with criminal records and couldn't get jobs elsewhere. They just got a big contract with Ben & Jerry's, so when you get that like Ben & Jerry's cookie dough ice cream, these are the guys and the gals that are making it. Greyston Bakery, one of thousands of social enterprises all over the country. Pioneer Human Services up in Seattle, you may know them. Very interesting. It was a nonprofit, as it said, founded in 1962, and it provides services to a number of the kind of folks I saw in downtown Olympia, actually, homeless people maybe who are recovering alcoholics and have drug abuse problems and so forth. And when they began, all of their money came from foundations. And they said, that's fabulous, but one of the things about funders is not often, but they can change their priorities. So they used to be into this, and now we're into that. But the people into this, then what are they doing for money now? So they said we need to get off the grant stream, and we need to build our own businesses. So today, this nonprofit employs 540 people. It's a major employer in the city. The people they employ are their clients, formerly homeless and so forth. They train them. They did things like they bought a rundown hotel and redid it all, and now you can stay in that hotel, and it's a fine place to stay. They have catering. They're manufacturing parts for Boeing airplanes. They have contracts with Boeing. $78 million in revenue last year, and there's something like 95% self-funded. And the thing about Pioneer Human Services, it's not, I think I'm getting a little feedback, I apologize. It's not going to move to China, and it's not going to move to Phoenix. It's rooted. It is, in its own sense, an anchor. New Community Corporation, I talked about community development corporations. This one was founded by a Catholic priest. Today it employs over 600 people who were formerly low income in the city of Newark. At one point it was the second largest employer in the entire city, a social enterprise. They've got shopping centers, they've got all kinds of catering and so forth, and their assets exceed $500 million now. That's quite a nonprofit, and as it says, employing over 600 people, helping them to build wealth. And finally, I'll have one more example. Market Creek Plaza is a very interesting development where a foundation in San Diego capitalized a development, a retail and cultural and commercial development in low-income neighborhoods in San Diego. And instead of, eventually the foundation said, look, if we're really going to build wealth in the community, we can't just own this ourselves and employ people. And so they did something that took a long time with the Attorney General of California, but they issued, in a sense, an IPO, except it's called a direct public offering. And it was shares in this development that they sold to low-income residents for, I can't remember the share price, but it was not a lot of money, but so that everybody in the community who wanted to could own a piece of the action. Today, the community owns 20% of the equity, and the plan is to have them own 50%. Meanwhile, a new foundation has been established that is taking the rest of the 50% of the equity, but it's a foundation based in the neighborhood. I saw a really moving video the day that the new shareholders, after the direct public offering, the day they received their shares, there was a big event and there were bands, and it's really cool. And it was a very profound moment. This woman said this thing stayed with me for years since I saw this interview. She said, I never thought, and this is a woman from the neighborhood, low-income, African-American woman, obviously had a pretty hard life. She said, I never thought a person like me would be able to own a piece of something like this. And I think the psychology of that is very, very profound, because I would assert that for those of us in this room who've had the kind of background and privileges and so forth we've had, not that your lives haven't been difficult and hard when they've been, but all of us know if we wanted to, if we had the interest to go out and own something and own a piece of a business or whatever, we could do that. We'd figure out how to do that. Here was a person, and I think there are tens of millions of people like her who have gotten to a place in life where there's just a ceiling on their life, and they don't think they could ever arise to that. So this is not only providing her an asset, and she's going to get some financial return. It's not going to be huge, but it's going to be steady income coming from it. But she has a new sense of self, and I think that's what's really important. Finally, evergreen cooperatives, and it's getting on 8. I'm probably going to talk about 10 or 12 more minutes, then we'll do question and answer. So the evergreen cooperatives is something I've been involved in, and it's why I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where, as my wife said to me, if I made a list of 100 places I want to live in the United States, Cleveland is not on the list. However, she's a real trooper, and we've come to really love Cleveland. It's a very, very special and very interesting place that's had a lot of difficulties like other older industrial cities, legacy or Rust Belt cities. What we've done there, I described this dynamic of these large anchor institutions, multi-billion-dollar institutions surrounded by this sea of disinvestment. What I was asked to do in my organization was to work with the Cleveland Foundation, which is the oldest community foundation in the country. The idea for a community foundation, you have one here, the idea for that originated 101 years ago in Cleveland, Ohio. So it's, along with LeBron James and rock and roll, it's one of the things we stake our claim on. And the strategy I was asked to develop was what they called economic inclusion. That is, how do we break down the disconnect between the billions of dollars being circulating and the great distress and disinvestment in the neighborhood? And we hit upon this very simple 3-part strategy. One, work with the anchor institutions to look for local procurement opportunities that could be driven locally, but maybe were being spent, in Chicago. Not everything could be bought locally, but a lot could. And I was involved in 120 interviews over a 6-month period with these institutions and the Chamber of Commerce and faith-based institutions and community corporation and so forth. And out of those interviews, we identified something like 60 potential new business opportunities that were not being spent locally but could be. Then we looked in the community where it's so distressed and saw there really aren't businesses there capable of supplying what the anchor institutions need. So we said, okay, second leg of the stool is we're going to start our own businesses. It's going to be a startup business strategy. We're going to locate the businesses in the neighborhoods where folks who need jobs live. Why? Because one, we want to build wealth in the community and root assets there. Two, 50% of the people, as we did interviews that we were looking to hire, didn't have their own transportation. Either they didn't have a car or their license had been pulled for unpaid tickets. So we need to put these businesses on bus lines where people can get to them. And we said, well, if we're going to start them up, let's include an employee ownership aspect so that as people are productive and generate profit, they can share in the profit rather than a single individual share or some outside investors. So we organize these as worker cooperatives. We now have 3 that currently employ about 120 people, 37% of whom are ex-offenders and some kind of, mark on their record. Often something had happened when they were 18 years old and they're 35 now, but it stayed with them and it's very hard to get employment. And we're growing. We have 2 or 3 more businesses in the pipeline. The hope is to create an integrated network of 10, 12, 15, 20 businesses. So we have 3 businesses, the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry, Evergreen Energy Solutions, Green City Growers, and I'll show you those companies. I'm going to show you a video, 3.5 minutes about them, and then move to conclusion. So Green City Growers, one thing in Cleveland, if you're eating lettuce and if it's not August and you're eating lettuce, that lettuce isn't coming from Ohio because the growing season is said. It's coming from California and Arizona. That means all those tens of millions of dollars being sucked out of the economy, plus there's 1,500 miles of carbon-based transportation that's moving the lettuce. So we built a food production hydroponic greenhouse that is 3¼ acres under glass on a 10-acre site. It's one of the largest in a core urban area. It's right in these neighborhoods. So this isn't out in the suburbs. It's right in the neighborhoods. So I was talking to the deputy mayor of a small community here, and you've got 4 acres of greenhouses, I think. So it's, how do you use this for employment? We're capable of growing 3 million heads of lettuce in there and 300,000 pounds of herbs, principally basil, and that's where the real money is. We currently have 38 employees, and we estimate it'll get to 35. So that's some pictures, and you'll see some video of it. Our Evergreen Cooperative Laundry, it's a LEED Gold commercial laundry facility. It's the greenest laundry in Northeast Ohio, maybe the state. We have 18 customers. You could see them. We have a capacity to do 10 million pounds of bed linen and towels and sheets. We're currently doing 6. So we have room to grow. We have 48 full-time employees, so we're at capacity. Both the greenhouse and the next business, both the laundry and the next business have been profitable for well over a year. So we had our first profit distribution last August, which was a terrific event. And we pay living wage and benefits and such. And the third is Evergreen Energy Solutions, which installs solar panels and LED lighting and retrofitting and renovating homes and the like. So this is a video we didn't produce it. It's by a sort of political magazine called Politico. So if you ever go to Washington, D.C., you see it everywhere, and everybody on Capitol Hill reads it and such.
I just feel like it's our time. People are moving back. We're on the rise. I can just feel a cultural shift happening here.
The Greater University Circle Initiative was really an initiative to bring back to life the 5 neighborhoods that surround University Circle and to improve the circle itself to benefit the institutions that are there, Case Western Reserve University, University Hospitals, Cleveland Institute of Art, Cleveland Clinic.
One of the kind of primary triggers of the actual collaboration was that they did a feasibility study and they determined that they were spending $3 billion in goods and services every year, just those 3 organizations outside of Cleveland. And so they started thinking about, hey, maybe we can retain this wealth in Cleveland. The neighborhoods surrounding University Circle have concentrated poverty. And so just about every stressor you can think about in terms, unemployment, a lot of single-headed households, a lot of vacancy. So the cooperatives came about. They said, hey, let's just create the business here and hire local people.
We have 3 of them. They're about 4 or 5 years old by now. 114, 115 employees. Good percentage of them prisoner reentry people. They're worker owners, and so they got their first checks recently for their profit share checks as owners, and I think it's had a huge impact.
I just finished doing 10 years in federal prison. I was homeless. I had nowhere to live. My son was very adamant, and he was very proud of his job. He kept telling, we write letters, talk on the phone. And he said, Dad, you need to be a part of this. And to show my gratitude, and to make my son look good, I was here every day. I was on time, I worked hard.
We have a brotherhood here. When you're a worker owner and part of the cooperative, you appreciate it more. You give it a lot more than just 8 hours because this is something that you're trying to build.
A lot of people just want a chance, just like me.
These are small for-profit businesses, and so in order to accomplish the things we set out to do from a social mission perspective, it really requires an ongoing focus on the things that have made us successful and will continue to make us successful. Quality product, excellent customer service, pricing, not above the market and not below the market. It absolutely is an ongoing balancing act.
We need to get our employees to a point where they're just as effective, if not more effective, than the machines they're competing against. We opted out of a lot of the automation that's in the industry so that we would have the job creation and help support the neighborhood, the community, and provide sustainable jobs that people take pride in.
The statement we wanted to make along with all of our anchor institution heads was, we're not abandoning these neighborhoods. We care about these neighborhoods, and we are part of your neighborhood and you're part of our neighborhood, and we have to succeed or fail together.
My children, I have 8 children, they're excited for me. They look at me like, Mommy, I can't believe you're actually, you're painting, you're doing, different things. They see me get up on the roof. Really wanted this opportunity, and I'm here.
So that's a bit of the Evergreen story, just to give you a feel for the people that are involved, because at the end of the day, this is about people. What I wanted to do was, you saw Orlando Santayella, the gentleman and his son, Orlando Jr. And I don't know if you could follow, but Orlando said, I was in the federal penitentiary for 10 years. I have no idea what he did or why he was in there. And, I thought it was cute. He said, and I came to work and I did a good job because I didn't want to embarrass my son. So, there's Orlando. He's come back to the community. In Cleveland, in these neighborhoods, the government says 5,000 returning citizens, ex-offenders, enter our neighborhoods every year. Very difficult for them to get a job. So you could see the need is so great. I mean, we really need to expand dramatically. But he got this job. He's been able to participate in our housing program. He's now buying his own house in Cleveland, a modest house, but he's buying his house. But the real kicker is what happened next. I got a call last year. So Orlando had been with our, and by the way, he's a supervisor of a whole crew, extraordinary worker. I got a call from a friend who works in the White House for President Obama on renewable energy. And my friend said, look, the president's going to do this big event down in Mountain View, California. And there's so much gridlock, in Congress about solar, and we can't get any money for it. So we're just going to get corporate America to come out and say, even if you guys don't do it in Congress, we're committed to solar. And like the CEO of Google is going to be there, and the CEO of Amazon, these incredible we're going to put solar on all of our roofs. But we don't have any like community-based enterprise like yours. We have these giant ones. So we'd like you to send somebody out to Mountain View to represent Evergreen Energy Solutions. So we sent Orlando out. So there he is, and with Google and Microsoft, and there's little the little energy company that could. And then at the end of it, the president's staff selected about 10 of the corporate executives to go backstage and meet him and photo op. And so this is what happened. So it's quite a journey from the federal penitentiary to this moment. So I wanted to share that with you. I don't know who that is with Orlando, but the guy's good looking, you know. So, okay. So I want to move to a close. I did want to say a few things about the role of local philanthropy. So what I've talked about is the role of, first, the overall frame of community wealth building. What are we trying to achieve? That context in which the activity happens. We're not just going for the next, giant, win the lottery and get a huge company and move here, although that would be nice, but we're leveraging our local assets and so forth. And the second thing I talked to you about is the role of anchor institutions that all of our communities have of any size and how they can be harnessed to benefit our communities. And then I looked with you at a range of models and initiatives taking place all over the country that are really enabling people to get into the economy and to build their assets and their wealth, as well as a decent income. And finally, I'd like to just talk about the role of philanthropy. There are a lot of other things we could talk about, but local philanthropy is essential. This whole thing that happened in Cleveland that led to this kind of moment could not possibly have happened had the Cleveland Foundation not taken a leadership position and said, look, we're committed to this community. There's 760 community foundations. We're one of them, and none of us are leaving the places we are. Yes, we can keep giving grants, but we need to do all kinds of other things. We've never helped start up for-profit businesses, but we're going to take a chance and do that. We're going to use our stature to bring together the CEOs of all of these institutions who never sit down together and don't really have a background of trust in working together. And we're going to create a new table in which they can work together and start to see new ways to approach these problems that will benefit them. And we're going to assign some senior staff to really drive this forward. And I've got some very good friends who did that. We're going to create a senior fellow position so we can get this guy, Ted Howard, whose mother doesn't know what he does, but we think he does something useful. Come on in here and help us out. So that's what we did. And that's what the Cleveland Foundation did. And that role as the kind of honest broker that has the community's best interests at heart, not any one institution's agenda, that's a very important role that community foundations can play. And I know, and I've been fortunate to meet with Norma and some of her staff and the board, and it's an extraordinary institution. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it's obviously one thing, if you have $2 billion in assets, like the Cleveland Foundation, you're a big dog in the city. But you could be a community foundation with $15 million in assets and still creatively leverage this power. So this is a book that was done by David Perry, who's a friend, and Terry Mazzani is the head of the Chicago Community Foundation, who says community foundations have at their root, at their very essence, the community. The community foundation is the one institution among all others that seeks to mobilize the resources of the community to meet the community's needs. And that's really what this institution is, and you're blessed to have one of these in your community. And we think there is, just like with the eds and meds, the universities and the hospitals, there's an anchor mission for community foundations as well, which is, again, fully deploying all the resources. Yes, the grant making, but the other kind of financial and human and social and intellectual and reputational, deploying them all in concert for a strategy to benefit local community. We did a report on this you can get from our website. I'm going to show you the URL. It's downloadable. It's free. Despite my sort of chief financial officer person, we're a very open source organization. So we're not all about monetizing our research. But we did a study of 30 community foundations around the country. You could see some are in your region that are doing very innovative things. And very quickly, Cleveland Foundation capitalized this whole network of, that's the model, I won't go into it, but of worker-owned companies drawing on anchor institutions. And really, as a result, beginning to set a new norm for what's acceptable corporate activity and behavior in our city. The Vermont Community Foundation, it's awarded grants to state organizations around healthy food, but it also supported state legislation to create a whole initiative. That's not something they'd ever done, but they brought their reputation to the table. They're a member of a network. They've set a commitment that 5% of their donor-advised funds, that is, if I have $100,000, I might put it in the foundation, that 5% of those will be invested locally. So, there's all kinds of different activities. In Cincinnati, they've done some very interesting things. They had big police problem, not unlike Ferguson 14 years ago, a police community problem, I mean to say. And they really saw that the issue of unemployment was killing them and it was killing the city. So they created what's called a minority business accelerator. They helped capitalize it. They got other funding commitments. It's now created nearly 2,000 jobs in the city. And the Community Foundation established a $2 million loan fund to help fund community wealth kinds of adventures. Arizona, the Community Foundation, you could see they loaned money to the Botanical Garden. They're going to get the money back, but what that loan did, first of all, it wasn't a grant, so they get the money back. It's low interest loan. But what it's done is allow the Botanical Garden to build an irrigation system they never could have afforded to do, and over time it's going to save the Botanical Gardens hundreds of thousands of dollars. So another creative use of the assets of a community foundation. And finally, this Encourage Community Foundation. This is in a little rural, very hard-hit community in Wisconsin. They used to have one factory. I think maybe it might have been in paper. I can't recall. And one day it went away. 5,000 people in this area worked in there, as I recall, and they closed it down. It just devastated everything. So the Community Foundation realized what we need to do is generate jobs, and they've started to deploy all their resources to do that. So that's the role of philanthropy. So I hope I've left you with both the frame in which this work is being done, the assets and power of anchor institutions, the kind of models that could be developed that are inherently wealth building and stabilizing, and the role of philanthropy in catalyzing this and having this all work together. I mentioned a bit about the public sector. All across the country, mayors are starting to take leads in this. And so when you get, Hillary Clinton, when she was first lady, or maybe just after she left, she famously wrote this book, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child. To do this kind of community wealth building strategy, it takes all hands on deck and the whole community. You can't just do it through the foundation or through the mayor's. You need to get everybody bought in. So at the Evergreen Cooperatives, for instance, the board that governs the whole effort has representation from the Evergreen companies that you saw, like Orlando's company. It has representation from investors like the Cleveland Foundation. The mayor's office has a seat on the board and appoints somebody to terms there. The anchor institutions have seats on the board, and local entrepreneurs and business leaders who don't know anything about co-ops but are committed to Cleveland sit on the board and add their business savvy and smarts. And that together, that group of people and representatives of the community, that group of people does not sit down anywhere in Cleveland except around these questions. You just simply do not get the owner of the Cleveland Indians baseball team sitting down with co-ops, but you do through this structure. And by the way, as a gift to the Evergreen workers, the owner of the Indians opened up the owner's box and invited the whole workforce to come in and watch an Indians game with all the fixings. You can imagine what it's like being there. So I'll leave you with this first. Those are some of our publications. We are publication happy. I have the greatest staff of research people we affectionately call research nerds, and we produce lots of reports. All of this stuff is downloadable at community-wealth.org. Last thing, so I said this is about you and the growing community wealth movement. And I put this slide up. It was risky because this is totally live and unrehearsed. I did not prepare anything to say about this slide. But it seems to me, having been in your community just a couple days, there's an extraordinary opportunity here to really make a huge impact. I know many of you are on this community, and therefore be part of a growing movement to make an impact on the country. And so I hope that some of what I've talked about and we'll talk about a bit has touched you in terms of your own personal life and your own role in this. Because, you know, the systems that we live in, you know, they're made by people. They're not descended from on high from God. You know, if you now sometimes it's hard to believe the system can ever change, but I suspect that if we were in, you know, 2000 BC in Pharaoh's, you know, Egypt, where it had already been Pharaoh's Egypt for 1,000 years, it probably looked like this is it. There's not going to be anything different. If you were in medieval Europe, you know, it's gone on for hundreds of years. Will it ever change? And so systems come and go, and people make history. And, you know, we've got big challenges, but huge opportunities before us. And so I just, you know, sort of celebrate you as the people that are going to join, perhaps with people all over the country, to begin to continue to expand this movement and have Olympia be one of the shining lights of building community wealth in your community. So finally, thank you. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and is it time for locally owned and locally made beer? Thank you. And yeah, so there's going to be some questions and answers, and then more cookies and cakes. So this gentleman here, I think they want you to use a mic so they could hear you on the tape.
I did not hear that last part, Norma. Speak right into the mic. So 2 quick questions. One, just is this possible that you will share your slides with us, make them available in some way?
I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to leave them with Norma, and then she
That would
and
be
her staff
fantastic.
can
Thank you.
circulate them if you signed in.
Okay. And then the second question, more specifically, with the Evergreen Co-ops, obviously there was a very substantial initial capital investment. Yeah. So was that gathered by this kind of roundtable of the anchor institutions?
Well, this was, I mean, you could see that laundry or that greenhouse. You know, you don't build those for $50,000. And we did this intentionally. You don't need to spend the money we did. That was a particular strategy because we were doing this for the first time really nationally. And what we wanted to do was capture the imagination of the anchor institutions. So we could have created a little 4-member snow cleaning co-op because there's a lot of snow. But it wouldn't have looked real to the anchors. And so where the money came from is the Cleveland Foundation initially put up money, and then other philanthropy, and they put up a grant. And then we created something called the Evergreen Cooperative Development Fund, which takes the grant money and then turns it into a 1% loan out to the companies. So they have to pay it back, and they're only charging 1%, so way below market rates. So we want slow, patient capital, and the idea is that over time it gets paid back, and then it can get redeployed for the next generation of businesses. It doesn't go back to the foundation. Eventually, the anchor institutions put in money, and substantial money. At one point, each put up, you know, they're bigger than your anchor institutions, so you kind of need to scale it. But they each put up $250,000 because they could see this was starting to work, and they wanted to be investors in it. And then we started to get, we also, though, got sources from our city government. So the Department of Economic Development accesses resources from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, for instance. There's something called HUD 108 loans, and it's a 20-year loan, basically, at about 2 to 3% interest. So it's very low interest, and it's designed explicitly to create employment and business opportunities in these kinds of low-income neighborhoods. So the city in our laundry was actually the first investor in, along with the Cleveland Foundation, our fund. The city put $1.5 million of HUD 108 money. All that needs to be paid back to the Fed. So this is not just free money. It all needs to be paid back. So there are multiple sources. And then we found some people who are what are called these days impact investors. And they wanted to put their money to work on behalf of the community. They wanted to make sure their principal was safe. They didn't want to lose their principal, but they only wanted like 2% return. They could have put that in the market and got way more. It's not all there, so a woman I know in Amarillo, Texas, actually, the way I got there, a woman who grew up in Cleveland ended up in Amarillo. It's a long story, but she's still loyal to Cleveland. So she said, what if I were to, I've got money, because she inherited money. I'll make a loan, a working capital loan of $150,000 to the greenhouse, and that you pay back at 2% interest. So we got some investors like that.
Thank you. But it was the Community Foundation of Cleveland that put in the initial money and coordinated the initial efforts?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, thanks. Okay, don't make it a long question, George.
Hey, Ted, thanks for coming out here to Olympia. My question is if you could share with us maybe the top 3 challenges you guys had to overcome and how you did it.
You mean specifically at Evergreen?
Yes.
Yeah. Good question. I'd say, one thing people might think is, well, given the workforce you're hiring, that's going to be a big challenge, right? I mean, Orlando, that was not a challenge at all. People want to work and are so eager for a second chance. One challenge was finding the right management for these companies that had the right skill set. So, running a sophisticated laundry operation like you saw, or a greenhouse, you really need to know what you're doing. And I couldn't run a laundry. I was naive enough at the beginning to think, how difficult can this be? And then I learned. So we had to find the right managers, and we didn't have the right talent in our neighborhoods. So we need to go out and find them. That was actually the very biggest challenge, because this is a wealth building strategy. We were committed, in the Fortune 500 companies in one recent year, the ratio of CEO pay to entry-level worker across the 500 averaged 209-1. We obviously couldn't do that, or there'd be no wealth in the company to build the wealth. So we set a standard of, it's a little flexible, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8-1. But we're looking for very talented people, and they're not going to get rich. And these are startups, really with an entrepreneurial zeal to them, but there's no back-end event where you sell it to somebody. The whole point is to keep it in the community. Bless you. So I think that was one of the challenges. I think another challenge is you'd like to learn to do this kind of work kind of quietly to yourself, and then after you're successful, you go, ta-da, we've done it. But the publicity for this got out ahead of us. And so it was like, learning to play the violin in public, and everybody's watching you. So we have had so many delegations of people, not just from the United States, but all over the world, come to Cleveland. And it's actually been a bit disruptive, because, you got to meet with people and workers get interviewed. So that was, and we've sort of tamped that down. And the other is that, very frankly, I don't want to leave you with the impression that the anchor model is just like falling off a log. You just dialogue, CEO says we're into it, all of a sudden laundry shows up. You really need to build the relationships. One of the things we learned is if the CEO of the hospital says, we will do this, you can count on us, you have to get that commitment. But 5 rungs down in the bureaucracy, there's a purchasing agent who's never met the CEO, and he could care less because he's been buying his laundry for the last 30 years from this company. Why would I change that? So creating the right relationships and dialogue in these institutions and being patient about that has been a challenge. But it has started to pay off. Yeah. Yes, Lisa.
Hey there.
You get to ask a question?
Anne gave me the mic.
Okay.
So I am curious about the civic engagement of these folks who now have a job. They are owner-operator of these cooperatives, that connection between self-sufficiency or wealth building and engaging. We have entrepreneurs of our program who are now testifying at city council hearings, and they kind of own the trough. And I just want to see if you've tracked that or you look at that. How do you understand that impact?
Yeah, well, that's part of the hope here. This is not, we're trying to build wealth in many different ways in our communities, and what I've focused on is the financial kind of piece of it. But we're also trying to build leadership and social capital and all that. Some of the members of the workforce, and we haven't been testifying in city council and all that, but have become very engaged in the community. There's a parallel organizing strategy called Neighborhood Connections. If you Google for Neighborhood Connections Cleveland, you'll see a whole organizing strategy. Again, the Cleveland Foundation has helped fund. And our workers have gotten involved in that and working sort of block by block with community groups and associations. And there's a lot further to go. The thing I'd say is, for these sorts of strategies to be effective, the goal is to transform place. So I talked about the place, the low income, all that. Can we imagine that this place, which many people consider too dangerous, and they drive through it with, and just go to work and drive right through again and don't go into the community. Can we take that place and work with people and turn it into maybe the greatest place to live in Northeast Ohio? And can we do that in a way that keeps the population that's there now and has been there historically, keeps them in place rather than improves the community but blows the community apart as a result through gentrification and so forth? And can we bring in income and racial diversity into the community and really get an extraordinary place? Because remember, it's right near the hospitals, it's near the university, the Cleveland Museum of Art is within walking distance of my home. This could be very desirable. And for that to happen, I'm going to use a word that, let's see if it works here. For that to happen, you can't just build these little pieces. There needs to be a new, if you will, politics in the community, by which I mean it's not enough to benefit 100 people or 500 people and their families through this economic enterprise. We need to create a new conversation in our communities where when people run for mayor, for instance, the people in the community say, we want to talk to you about the kind of development we want. We don't want you bringing low-wage jobs that don't allow us to get ahead into our community. We don't maybe pay a lot of taxes because we don't make a lot of money, but these are our tax dollars. What we want them used for is to build wealth in our communities, to empower local entrepreneurs and small business people, to give us the opportunity to work in companies like this, to give us the opportunity to work in green companies. So that's where this needs to go in communities, in my view, all over the country, is we need to create, these aren't gifts. Right now they're kind of neat, there are neat little things happening. We need to tip the balance around what we consider appropriate and what we want in our communities. And that's the long-term play here. By the way, I said, we want to work in green businesses. There's this sort of mythology a lot of us had, and I actually, to my discredit, I had it when we started this. I thought, if you're living in an inner city neighborhood and you don't really, you can't hardly even feed your family and you can't get a job, the lowest thing on your list of what you're looking for is a green job. You just want a job. And we hired somebody very early on, and I asked him what the opportunity meant to him. And he said, what's so exciting to me is this is a green job. And I said, really? I thought he was going to say, earning above minimum wage. And he said, yeah, I've been hearing about this green jobs thing. And so I went to the library because I don't have a computer. And I got online and I started searching for green jobs. Like, what is this whole thing about? And he said, after being there for an hour, I concluded if I wanted a green job, I had to move to Portland, Oregon. Literally, he said that. And he said, so that we have green jobs in our community. I didn't show you, but one of the solar installations we did We do big solar installations. We did a ground-mounted solar installation that Orlando and his crews built in the dead of winter last winter. That's a 1 megawatt solar field in the hardest hit neighborhoods of Cleveland. 5,000 solar panels they put in to sell a meg of clean energy to the university and university hospitals. And that is a source. We've had it up now for going on a year, or 9 months or something. I can't remember. We've had it up there for a long time. And people told us, you can't put these solar panels in the community. That's going to get trashed because everything else does. We've had one solar panel broken with somebody threw a rock, because that's an asset people want in their community. Yes?
Hi. Excuse me. My name is Rachel Friedman, and I'm sorry I was late. I worked until about 7:30. So I am the president of a small nonprofit called Sustainable South Sound. And we're an organization that supports a variety of elements around sustainability, economic, environmental, social justice. And so you used the word local in your last little explanation. And I'm wondering, have you incorporated that concept of localism? In effect, what I'm hearing is that that's what you are doing. Yeah. It doesn't sound, though, that you're espousing that term, which seems to have multiple opinions about it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a fairly new member of the Business Alliance for Living Local Economies, BALI, so I'm all about local. It is there is no agreed definition of local, so it gets a little confusing. And that's why I've been talking about an emphasis on place and sort of community and rootedness. We use a variety of definitions of local in Evergreen. So one is local hiring. We mean to the extent possible, literally in the neighborhoods and census tracts of these 6 neighborhoods. Now, we can't achieve that all the time, but it's really targeted local hiring. When we talk about the greenhouse, which is a local, agriculture production, to make it all work, our sales area, our local sales area is something like, 50 miles, because we just can't sell enough lettuce there. So, but the general idea is, how can we, to the extent possible, localize the economy to get that sort of multiplier? So we do talk about it a lot. And, there are a lot of buy local campaigns. You see it all the time. I'm sure you see stores here, right? So you're doing through BALI, or Amoeba is another group that does this kind of thing. And I see it all over the country. Part of what we're trying to do is foster the idea of institutional buy local, as well as individual consumers buy local. Any more questions before George can hit the pub? With his green. I'd love to. I've got to catch an early flight tomorrow to go work with Kaiser Permanente. Yeah.
Hey, just a very tactical question, Ted. Yeah. Cleveland Foundation, in terms of loans that will come back, and then just money they put up front and so on. What are those figures roughly, if you can share them?
Well, it's a little, then it becomes, what are we looking at? If you look at just for evergreen cooperatives, for the R&D and the development and all the mistakes that you make when you do something for the first time, and then the revolving loan fund, blah, blah, blah. It's, it's probably been $6 or $7 million over a, 7-year period. So it's a lot of money. On the other hand, the foundation's going to spend that money trying to create jobs and fight poverty anyway, so they made this bet. But Greater University Circle, this is something I didn't have time to touch on. This Evergreen is an employment and wealth building strategy to change a neighborhood. But you can't just change a neighborhood with employment strategies. There are lots of other things in the neighborhood, like transportation and school systems and housing. And so what the foundation created, and I didn't talk about, was there's a larger frame inside of which Evergreen lives, and that larger frame is called the Greater University Circle Initiative. And it's, again, anchor-based, working at the city and to start to address all of these issues. And that larger initiative, I don't know how much money they've put into it, but it's considerably more than that. Some of it's what are called program-related investments, where they've put $6 million into an investment to build new retail and improve stuff, but all that gets repaid. So that's why it gets a little confusing. The big thing, though, is what the community foundation was able to do with its money in terms of accessing additional money. So, like with Evergreen, it may have put in this X million, but what it's brought in is 2 or 3 times in tax credits that would not have gone to Cleveland had they not done this. It's brought in these low interest loans. It's brought in national foundation. So the strategy has been use precious and discrete philanthropic dollars to access these and bring in these other sources. And I wouldn't be surprised that this Greater University Circle Initiative has literally brought, something like $100 million or more into the city that very likely would not have hit Cleveland but for this strategy.
So let's keep it to 2 more questions.
And 2 quick answers. I'll do quicker. It's our designer. This lady designed the little brochures and flyers and all that stuff you saw. She did really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Does this work?
And I'm going to take all that stuff to my mom so she can see what I do. I've got it all in my suitcase.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you got me all. Anyway, the compliment.
Talk into the mic.
You quoted how the U.S. computes poverty from Japan and England. How so?
How's it different?
Yeah, how
So the way we compute poverty started during the War on Poverty under LBJ, and they decided they needed some metric, and it has to do with, God, I haven't looked at this in a long time. It has to do with like the cost of groceries and rent, and there are these different factors that change, and what does a family need? So it's this sort of basket of these things. The way every other country does it is, what is the median income in the country, which is easily quantifiable, and what is 1/2 of the median? And everybody below half of the median is considered in poverty. But we're too clever for that. What else? One last question. I hope it's going to be inspiring.
I don't know if it's inspiring or not. I live in a small town, and I'm wondering about ideas and examples for small rural towns.
Yeah, that's a long question, but one of our people here is actually evaluating a piece of work in rural communities in Appalachia around how do you, in communities that are small that don't have big anchor institutions, for instance, how do you organize strategies like this? And there's, on our democracycollaborative.org website, if you look at, if you click on our team, that's our staff people, and you look down for the name Marjorie Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, Marjorie's this extraordinary writer and thinker, and she's a really elegant writer. And she's been involved in a project funded by the Ford Foundation for many, many years, called WealthWorks, and it's about keeping wealth in rural communities local. And it's probably too complicated to talk about, but it's rather than relying on these big anchor institutions that these communities don't have, it's creating what they call a value chain of, so if you're creating a product, then there's processing, and then there's transportation, then all these pieces, and linking this all together to have maximum local impact and keep the wealth local. So if you look, you'll find a whole report that she and a colleague of hers did before she joined the Democracy Collaborative about how you build wealth in rural communities and how you keep it local.
So here's what I want to say, first of all, is, it's not enough to have a really good idea. I'm very good at that. But it takes a community foundation to make it happen. So I want to take a moment just to say thank you to Norma Scheidemann and her board for making the investment, the risky investment, to getting this man here. So let's do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Norma.
And I want to thank my 11-year-old for coming and staying the whole time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And more importantly, I just want to say humbly thank you, Ted Howard, for taking the time to meet with, God, I took him to so many meetings, it's just bad. But thank you for your time and energy. Are you all interested in taking a next step sometime in the future? Who of you?
Yeah.
All right. Me too. Okay,
Great.
let's give him a round of applause.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Drive home safely and enjoy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you.